Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have attorney Dave Aronberg with us today. We'll chat with Dave in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Dave Aronberg served 3 terms as the elected state attorney for Palm Beach County from 2012 to 2024. He is also a former assistant attorney general, White House fellow, and Florida state senator, where he was elected in 2002. In 2010, he returned to the Florida Attorney General's office as a special prosecutor for prescription drug trafficking. He frequently appears on cable television as a legal commentator, and he is the managing partner of Dave Aronberg Law and a strategic partner with Capital City Consulting in West Palm Beach. Dave, welcome into the back room.
Andy, thank you for having me.
So let's start with Trump's weaponization of the Justice Department. Back after the election, when he appointed Pam Bondi Attorney General, you were interviewed very frequently, and having worked with her when she was Florida Attorney General, you felt that she fully respected and would uphold the rule of law and would operate independently from Donald Trump. I cited you many times. I was like, man, if Dave Aronberg says she's cool, maybe she's going to be just fine. I take it it's been a huge disappointment to you, as it has to the rest of us.
Well, those of us who know Pam and would say the same thing, that she is someone who's a good person who was loyal to Trump, always loyal to Trump. And that's why I never thought she would totally be independent. I knew that the White House would have great sway over the DOJ. I do think things are being run out of the White House. And I do see signs, for example, of pushback where Trump had to go after her a little bit on social media to say, hey, why are you slow walking the prosecutions of James Comey and Letitia James? I'm going to appoint Lindsay Halligan, essentially foist Lindsay Halligan upon you to do this. And so you see signs of pushback, but she's been loyal to Trump. Things have been run out of the White House, and we've seen the results of that. Obviously, there are a lot of things I disagree with, but most of my predictions about it have come true. There are some things I've been surprised about, and that, for example, the level at which they're going after Trump's political enemies, the retribution, Don Lemon. Now, John Bolton is a different matter because there are legitimate facts there that could sustain a case, but there's others. Some of the rhetoric you see about judges has been surprising, but overall, keep in mind, if Pam Bondi were not the Attorney General, who would be the Attorney General? Matt Gaetz, he was appointed first. Would it be Sidney Powell? She's rumored.
Yeah, that does. Right? I agree with you, but
so that's why I always said that Pam Bondi would be the best attorney general that Trump could appoint for Democrats, because if you compare it to the one he chose the first time, Matt Gaetz, or anyone else he would pick, I mean, Katie barred the door.
I hear you, and on some level, I agree, and I think everyone would agree that she's better than Matt Gaetz would have been. But that's no real consolation. I mean, Donald Trump has always said, I want my Roy Cohn. And he's got his Roy Cohn, and she just unfortunately happens to be the Attorney General of the United States and has the Department of Justice and the FBI as part of her fiefdom. And therefore, to your point, she is incredibly loyal and not independent from Donald Trump. So we see that. I mean, as I was waiting for you, I was watching CNN, and they showed a clip of her talking about Don Lemon, which I want to ask you about. But after she was talking about how he, shouldn't have gone and done what they say he did, which was to break the law by entering a church and being part of a protest, she then went into a whole diatribe about like how he's a failed journalist and all that. So there's the coming from Merrick Garland, right, where, he tried so hard, went overboard not to be political. And now we're dealing with her where, like, what is whether he's a successful or failed journalist have anything to do with her role as Attorney General. So she's not only his Roy Cohn, she's kind of become like a spokesperson, which is really strange. In your experience with her down in Florida, like, I know she had ties to Trump and there were questionable things that occurred down there as well. But I don't think anyone really had a sense that it would be this bad, that she would be this aligned, and there'd be
Well, if you take the rhetoric from all the cabinet secretaries, you'll see they're all echoing this new Trumpian Republican Party, where it's, if you even ask a simple question, we'll go after you 10 times and never say we're sorry. And so some of the rhetoric that comes out of all these guys, it is surprising. That's where Trump is, that he is a party of one. And if you want your job, you want to stay loyal to him. Now, keep in mind, when it comes to Bondi, she has incurred the wrath of the right and the left both. The right has been upset with her because of Jeffrey Epstein. Even Susie Wiles took a shot at her. So she's getting it from both sides. Not an easy job. I'm not justifying things that I disagree with her, but I'm just saying, we put it in perspective, where this is Trump's cabinet, where they take on his personality. Things are run out of the White House. And if you want to keep your job, you play ball, or else you're gone. That's why I like Kristi Noem, for example, who's an abject failure at her job. I mean, unquestioned failure. She can keep her job because Trump demands loyalty. As long as you're loyal to the boss, you're going to keep your job, even though you're going to get publicly humiliated, like she has been, by being pushed aside in favor of Tom Homan. Mm-hmm. So I could talk about the Lemon case. I have a lot of thoughts about that. There are a lot of things that I'm concerned about, but one thing that I have been pleased with, to give you a little silver lining, is that the judiciary has stepped up, has provided a guardrail. In a time when checks and balances are more important now than ever, we have depended on the judiciary to be the one branch of government to stand up to the executive branch, especially when the legislative branch, for the first time in American history, has emasculated itself, has voluntarily given up all its power to the White House.
Yeah. Do you think that it can continue the way it has? Because, the truth is the lower courts, the appellate courts have done a pretty good job. The Supreme Court made
not as much.
some horrible decisions, although there are cases that are in front of them that we're waiting for, like the tariff case, which I think is going to be a very consequential ruling, specifically because it'll show whether or not these guys are strict constructionists, as they claim to be, because the Constitution is pretty clear, right? Congress has the power over taxes. Tariffs are taxes. This is pretty black and white. So, and I've always thought that maybe the justices have like two buckets. There's the let's give Trump some stuff, make him feel happy bucket. And then the other is, are we going to give him the keys to the democracy bucket? I don't think they would do the latter to the degree that a lot of people fear. And if you take away the immunity case, not that was a small ruling, but they really haven't given him that. So I agree with you, but can it hold?
I think that things are going to change after the midterms, because then you'll see Congress finally start to push back. So you won't have to depend on the judiciary like we are right now. But right now, when you have one party rule in D.C., the judiciary is more important than ever. So the trial courts, the district courts, have been really strong. You could say that about Trump-appointed judges, too. Yep. You've seen some really strong rulings. The appellate courts, less so, but still holding the line. It's the Supreme Court that's been the problem. The immunity decision, other decisions that they've made have been really upsetting, and it's the legacy of this Roberts Court. And I don't think it's going to get much better there, but I think the damage has been done, and I think that you're starting to see just a little turn where the public is starting to realize that, this is not the country we want. I think it finally hit home when they saw 2 American citizens get shot to death on the streets of Minneapolis. I think that's something that affected people on both sides. Say, this is not the country we want. And I think also a lot of the self-dealing has gotten through. I think people are, we've come to expect, unfortunately, a bunch of corruption in our politics, but this is something like next level, what we're seeing. I mean, every day. And I think that when people are struggling and prices are high and Trump is saying, no, they're not, you're doing better than ever, people are like, well, I believe you are my lying eyes. I know how much I'm spending on groceries, no matter how much Trump loves that word.
Right.
We know how much we spend.
New word.
And, right. A great word. What a word. And then when we see billions of dollars going into the pockets of people in power, that I think that breaks through. And I think you're going to see it in the midterms. I think you're going to see a blue wave.
Well, it'll be interesting to see where this $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS goes, because if he somehow succeeds in that, and it's kind of hard to imagine how he wouldn't, because like he's in charge of everything. And to, what you were saying before, congressional Republicans have completely abdicated their role. So it's like he sues the IRS. He's in charge of the IRS. He tells the IRS, settle. Boom, he's got cash in his pocket. I think if that were to happen, even though I'm hoping that perhaps realistically it won't, I think Americans who are struggling and sitting at their kitchen tables are going to be like, this is insanity.
I think so too, but we've seen this before with DOJ. He sued them over the Jack Smith prosecutions, and they haven't settled as far as I know yet. And I do think that even Trump realizes there'll be a heightened sense of outrage if this happens. And perhaps on his way out, he tries to do it, like he will issue pardons to Ghislaine Maxwell possibly on his way out of office.
Right.
But I do think it's a bridge too far. Plus, he's making so much other money on crypto and all these other ventures. I mean, you saw the UAE got access to rare chips in exchange for putting money in a crypto fund involved with Trump's involved with. So I mean, really, we've never seen this before. This is not like, Teapot Dome scandal. I mean, this is like crazy stuff.
He's insatiable. And to your point, it's never enough. Whether it's political, financial, it's just never enough. The cruelty, the chaos, it's really the blood that runs through his veins, and it's the air he breathes. And you and I can look at him and wonder, like, why? Just stop. You got whatever you wanted, really. But he can't. There's something, I think he's a sociopath, but, there's something wrong with him to the point where if you're up at 1 o'clock in the middle of the night and you are shit posting about Trevor Noah, that you're, watch out, Trevor, I'm coming for you, baby. Like, we're going to have some fun with you. That's not normal, okay? Like, that wouldn't be normal for anyone. It wouldn't be normal for your neighbor across the street, let alone the president of the United States and the commander-in-chief of the world's greatest military. So something is off, and I think, to your point earlier, the American people are starting to, a lot of this stuff is really breaking through because it's exhausting and it's infuriating.
It is. The Trevor Noah stuff worries me less than when he calls upon his Republicans to take over elections.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a second, but yeah. I want to ask you about Trevor Noah and then Don Lemon. But first, I want to go back to the judiciary. Are you surprised at all by not just the rulings, but the language that's coming out of these judges in their opinions? I mean, they are really excoriating him and the administration.
And some of it's from Trump-appointed judges. Yes. There was that one about the 5-year-old that's been going around. It's viral. And these are Republican-appointed judges, most of them, it seems like. I think that the judges, they see that what we're seeing. They read the same articles. They watch the same news. And although they can't be political, I think they're ready to burst. I think they're just looking for a vehicle to say someone has to step up. And if you guys who are elected to do it want to do it, we're going to do it. And we're going to do it the way we can under the law, legally, within the ethics of our profession, but we're going to make our voices heard. And what are you going to do about it? Because we have lifetime appointments. That's the beauty of being a federal judge. You are insulated from political pressure. You're insulated from retribution. They can't even freeze your salary. You're there for life. They could try to impeach you, but that ain't happening. So good for them. And that's why I still have hope. I mean, people have been so demoralized, but that's what they want. They want you to be demoralized.
Yes.
I have hope because I see judiciary holding. And you just got to you don't even have to get to November. The key date is, Andy, the key date is not even November because that's the midterm elections. When qualifying ends, when the Republicans in Congress see that no one can run against them
absolutely
on the right, I think that's when they push back. Because once they realize that they're not going to have a Trump-endorsed right-wing challenger, I think they speak out and they start slowing down all this stuff.
Yeah, filing deadlines. I've been saying that for a couple months now. You're 100% right. All right, back to Trevor Noah. Can you sue a comedian? I mean, I used to do stand-up comedy. I always thought comedians could say whatever they want because it's satire, right? Like, it's comedy. You can, it's a joke. Is there any legal teeth to this kind of a threat?
You can sue anyone you want. You just have to have a lawyer and a couple $100 to file the lawsuit. It's like in poker. All you need is a chip and a chair, right? Then you got a chance. But no, the lawsuits aren't going anywhere. But you can sue anyone. Trump sued the pollster in Iowa for issuing a bad poll, not a nefarious.
He's threatening the New York Times now to do the same thing.
Right. Yeah, Ann Seltzer and the Iowa newspaper, New York Times. Right. So he sues, and the only time he wins on it is when these defendants decide to settle for their own reasons. Right. And so it emboldens him. But if you do get a judge like Judge Middlebrooks in the Southern District of Florida who says this is ridiculous, then you can get hit with serious sanctions. Trump did this when he sued the DNC and Hillary Clinton for various stuff. And not only did it get thrown out, but Judge Middlebrooks just fined Trump and his lawyers over $1 million. And it's now pending on appeal. But that is a sanction that could make people think twice. Maybe not Trump, but your lawyers, yeah.
I mean, how many of his lawyers were disbarred and sanctioned? I mean, I don't know. Yet you see people filing lawsuits on his behalf, same kind of shit over and over again. So I don't know if they think they're going to be insulated or if they've learned that they'll just get a pardon. So,
yeah,
you know.
but sanctions from the bar can't be pardoned away. Fines can't be pardoned away. Maybe they can be reimbursed by some Trump fund out there, but it is a stain on your reputation. And that's why I do think that if judges would be tougher on these frivolous lawsuits, then you'd see fewer of them. But they haven't been. Judges notoriously are very reluctant to issue what's called Rule 11 sanctions. They're reluctant because they want to keep the courthouse doors open to everyone, but they shouldn't allow it to be open for abuse. And I've always wanted them to get tougher on frivolous lawsuits.
Mm-hmm. So if he were to actually file a suit against Trevor Noah, you think that there's very good grounds that would get tossed, a motion to dismiss, like right up front?
Yeah, I mean, the defense lawyer would just hold up the First Amendment and it'd be over. I mean, unless what he said about him is false, like defamation. But it's a joke. First of all, comedians get a lot of leeway. It's a joke. But also, he's not saying, if he said, hey, folks, this guy's a child molester, that you can get sued for that. But that's not what he said.
Right. Yeah. What about Don Lemon?
The case against Don Lemon is part of Trump's retribution campaign. We've seen it with Letitia James. We've seen it with James Comey. And the Don Lemon case will end like theirs ended. It'll end with a judge throwing it out before it ever gets to a jury. And that is because, first off, there's a case of selective prosecution here. There were several journalists there. There were only two, Lemon and a blogger from the left, who were arrested and prosecuted. Also, there are questions about the sufficiency of the allegations, meaning to violate federal law, the FACE Act or the KKK Act. By the way, how ironic, you're using the KKK Act, an act designed to go after the KKK, to go after a gay black man. It is kind of ironic, but the facts are that Lemon was following a story. He may have known, and he did know apparently from some of the videos, that they were going to go into a church. So perhaps if he was told to leave and didn't, that could be a state misdemeanor of trespassing. The state is not prosecuting him for this. The federal government is saying, no, this is a federal felony, violating the FACE Act, which says you cannot go into a house of worship or an abortion clinic. You can't block people. You can't threaten people. You can't use force. So Lemon didn't do any of those things.
No, and
so
there's video of him talking to the pastor saying, I'm not here with the protest. I'm a journalist. I'm covering it. I mean, he says it. There's videotape of him distancing himself from the protesters. I mean, I don't know what more you can. I don't know. Today we live in an age where video doesn't seem to matter anymore. But I mean, that's pretty clear, Well,
the talking points on the right are that under the Biden administration, Merrick Garland, who we could talk about as well, it just shows you, by the way, how different the parties are. When they go low, we go high. We appointed Merrick Garland, a judge, upstanding ethics, who was scared to even look political. And you see what happened. The result is. So the fact is,
by the way, I got a joke I made up about Pam Bondi, because every time I hear her speak, there's just something it's like somebody's jabbing my head, and I can't figure out like what it is specifically. And I decided that whenever she's speaking, like to the press, it sounds like she's furious with you, but only has 15 seconds to tell you why. Right?
I appreciate clean jokes. See, that's you would not get sued for a good clean joke like that. That's why you were a successful comedian, Andy. Successful. I think she would laugh at that. I think
the key word is successful. I don't know if I would agree with you on that. That's why I'm here. So.
Well, let's talk about the question about Don Lemon. That's right. So the FACE Act. So the reason why he didn't violate the FACE Act is because he didn't obstruct anyone. He didn't threaten anyone, and so that's not a violation of the FACE Act. There were protests there, but protesting inside of a church is not a violation of the FACE Act unless there were those things I mentioned: obstruction, force. When the right uses their talking points that says that under Merrick Garland and Biden, there were all these peaceful protesters who were prosecuted outside of abortion clinics. Well, that's not really true. Those people who were prosecuted under the FACE Act at abortion clinics were blocking people from entering and exiting the abortion clinic. That's the difference. The reporters here were not blocking anyone inside the church. So if you want to get them for trespass, maybe. FACE Act, no way. So what they're doing to get around it, they're saying conspiracy. So they're saying that Lemon knew that they were going to do this. Knowing that protesters are going inside of a church is different than knowing that protesters are going inside of a church and blocking people from leaving or threatening people. There's no proof of any of that. And that's why...
Or being a part of the organization of it. I mean, your job as a journalist is to get upfront information about where shit's happening, and then you go cover it. So now, mere knowledge that this protest was taking place is not tantamount to being part of a conspiracy.
Exactly. And then there's the KKK Act, which says you can't deprive people of their rights. Jack Smith used it against Trump after the January 6th riots. This act says you targeted people because you wanted to deprive them of some of their rights. So you targeted Christians in the church because you hate them, essentially. You want to deprive them of their rights of worship. That's not what Lemon was doing, or the protesters for that matter. On this one, the protesters should not be charged under that act, because the reason why they were in the church was not because they hated Christians. It was because they wanted to protest the pastor who was heavily involved with ICE. If that pastor was at a bowling alley, they would have been at the bowling alley.
Right.
But they thought he was at the church. So that act also doesn't apply. This, to me, at least for Lemon, is an easy dismissal.
And, Don is a guy who literally wrote a book about what faith has meant to him in his life over his entire life. I mean, he grew up in the church. Like, Don Lemon wasn't in that church to disrupt church services. Let's talk about the Epstein situation. We had a big dump of 3 million documents, photos, videos last week. What are your biggest takeaways from this data dump?
This was supposed to be a Democratic conspiracy. This was supposed to be Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Larry Summers on Epstein Island, right? That was what was promised, MAGA. That's why they made this into a cause celeb. That's the whole thing of QAnon and Pizzagate. This was a Democratic conspiracy. Well, the names I saw were Elon Musk. I mean, he said, hey, what night is the wildest party? When is the wildest party? How about Steve Bannon? I mean, he was like an advisor to Epstein, like close advisor and friend. In fact, Epstein joked in the emails that Epstein was the world's most expensive travel agent for Bannon. Crazy. How about Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, who said that he lived next to Epstein in New York. They went over Epstein's home. They saw this creepy massage table and candles. And then Epstein made some weird comment about, what kind of massages I'm getting. And that's when Lutnick said, he turned to his wife and said, we are never coming back here again.
Yeah.
And they
2005.
Right, 2005. But then, was it 2012? Mm-hmm. Right? He was apparently a guest on Epstein Island.
Get my bed ready.
Right. He was there for a luncheon, took his family to see Epstein Island. This is, again, remember, I have less grace for people who are friendly with him after the 2008 conviction than before. Bill Clinton was friends with Epstein before. I don't see evidence, and maybe you can show it to me, that Bill Clinton was buddies with him after the conviction. I think Bill Clinton stopped being friends with him. All these other people didn't seem to matter. They kept going to him, and that is my problem I have with him. So my biggest takeaway is, well, so much for a whole Democratic conspiracy. It sort of looks nonpartisan, and it sort of looks a conspiracy of the global elites, the people that Steve Bannon loves to rail against. Well, it's always been projection for that guy.
Yeah, well, it's confession of projection for all of them. So you have Trump, you have Musk, you have Lutnick. So all these people who have been on record denying that they ever went to Epstein's Island. Actually, Trump yesterday slipped when he was talking to the press, and he started to call it Jeffrey's Island. And then he corrected himself and said Jeffrey Epstein's Island, which was really telling. But I know where there's smoke, there's fire is not a legal term. But when people lie about doing something like that, when there are 1,000+ mentions in this latest dump of Donald Trump's name, there's like 38,000 mentions of his name, Melania's, Mar-a-Lago's, and related phrases and places. In your experience, is there fire where there's smoke?
Prosecuting someone is different than if there's fire. You could say, yes, a person was guilty, but can you prosecute it? Is the witness there? Virginia Giuffre sadly committed suicide. What happens in old cases is that evidence decays, witnesses die, memories fade. It's very tough, especially when you're dealing with high-powered people who we're going to have some of the best lawyers. And can you get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt? And it's going to take the victims to stand up and say, yes, this is who did it, and I've got corroboration. So it's going to be really hard to do. But there's a court of public opinion, and I do think that the public should at least get the files, because transparency is the greatest disinfectant. That is the way we can just let it out and then figure it out. We can debate it all day long. And I do think people are sophisticated enough to know that just because you're mentioned in the Epstein files doesn't mean you committed any crimes. But if someone is alleging that you committed a crime and there's corroboration in the files, or other people want to come out and said, I was there, then yeah, I think that's something that needs to be debated and perhaps prosecuted. I just want to temper expectations. That I think that it's unlikely to be able to prosecute someone at this late stage, but not impossible. One more thing on that. The Southern District of New York was investigating this up to January 2025. They were investigating co-conspirators. But then when Trump took over, he ended that investigation and all the files were transferred to Main Justice.
Yeah. So in this dump last week, there's a ton of redactions which appear to protect the guilty, while there are many instances where victims' names, their personal information, photos, nude photos, were not redacted or concealed. What do you think is the impact of this re-traumatization and re-victimization on other victims and survivors in either this case or other cases that, would stop them perhaps from coming forward in the future? Why would they ever feel like the U.S. government and the law will protect them if this is the way the government and the Justice Department treats their really sensitive information?
This has been a problem for many years, not just with this matter, where people who are alleged victims of domestic violence, of human trafficking, sex crimes, they are afraid to speak up. And these individuals, especially when I was a prosecutor for 12 years, a state attorney, when they would come to us and then they would not come back, we would still try to prosecute that case anyways. In fact, more than half of domestic violence victims in Palm Beach County do not cooperate with prosecutors. So this is a problem that's been going on for a long time. Silence is the enemy here. There is a stigma that should not exist. And so I think it is important to show that people do care. There are people who will stand up for survivors. The leaking of the names of the survivors in the releases, I think that was sloppiness. I don't think that anyone intentionally wants to leak the names, the identities, but I think it shows the haphazard way that these documents have been released. And that's why you see some documents which are covered in black, totally redacted, and others pinpoint redactions. Why? We don't know. Why are some names revealed of victims and others are not? Why? Why, when it comes to alleged co-conspirators, are all the alleged co-conspirators' names concealed except for 3? Why? Why is Leslie Wexler's name unredacted in there? He's apparently an alleged co-conspirator. Why is his unredacted and others are not? The other 2 names that are unredacted, I understand. Ghislaine Maxwell, obviously, and Jean-Luc Brunel, who died of suicide in a jail cell in France. Their names are unredacted, but why Leslie Wexler? And I think it's because there's really a haphazard way that this has gone about.
Yeah. Well, the survivors are outraged over this latest dump, and rightfully so. I think just this morning the lawyers have asked a judge to force the Department of Justice to take down these new files that have been made public. Can something like that succeed in court? Do you think it will?
Unlikely. It's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube. The files are public.
Right.
Even Trump knew that when they released those calls into the FBI. You saw the summaries are really just very salacious without evidence to back it up. But they showed there are people who claimed things about Trump, and then they took them down. And I think what happened was the White House called over and said, what are you doing? Take those down. They took them down, and they realized that makes it a bigger story, because once it's out there, it's no going back. Now, when it comes to victims, they have to take it down, any names, because it's in the law, the Epstein Files Transparency Act. They have to. But it's another step to say we're going to remove millions of documents that are already out there that have nothing to do with the victims' names. I don't think they can do that. And also, even if they did that, it's out there. We now have access to it. Right. There are enough screenshots. And so the best they can do, I think, is to compel the redaction of all those names. And the DOJ is doing that because they have to under the law. And like I said, that one was a screw up. I don't think that one was intentional.
Well, speaking of the law, there's still apparently 3 million documents and such that have not been released. Yet the administration claims, Todd Blanche, Deputy AG, that the full files have now been released. So is that it? Like, can the Department of Justice just blatantly violate the law, especially after missing the deadline by 6 weeks now?
Okay, this is the key question here, because this one everyone wants to know. So let's start from the Epstein Files Transparency Act. First off, the act is riddled with loopholes. It was not as tight as it should be. The act allows the DOJ to redact documents for national security, anything that's not unclassified, so Trump can classify documents in his head perhaps and make a claim out of it. How about for an existing criminal investigation? Like the one they supposedly created in the Southern District of New York over Democrats. So I don't know if that investigation is in good faith or not, but they're going to use that as a way to say we're not releasing documents. So the act permitted that. So they may need to pass a new act once the Democrats get control of Congress, because this act has too many loopholes. Here's the other problem with the act. It has no enforcement mechanism.
Right.
So when you say turn over or else, you're violating the law, and they're saying so. So that's why Congress is scrambling. The DOJ is leaning into privileges as well. They're saying we also don't have to turn over documents based on what's called deliberative process privilege and work product privilege. Now, that one is not permitted under the act. The act does not say you can withhold documents for that. But you know what the DOJ is saying? The DOJ is saying, well, you didn't say we couldn't. You didn't mention it in the act, so we're going to assume that those privileges apply. And the members of Congress saying, well, we did not include that in the act. We put a list of exceptions, and that's not one of them. So that is going to court. That's where a judge can come in and say, no, those documents protected under those privileges must be produced.
Is there anything that Congress and the survivors can do from a legal standpoint to force the release of those 3 million documents that apparently still exist that haven't been released for whatever reason?
Well, if a document is not released based on those privileges, they can go to a judge and say, force it. If a document is not released based on these other things like existing criminal investigation, national security, et cetera, it's going to be harder to, because the act says you don't have to produce it.
Right.
So that's why they're stuck, and I think a new law perhaps needs to be passed. Now, when you see Massey and Khanna say, well, we're going to impeach these officials, well, you can do that in the House, but you need a couple of Republicans to go along, and then the Senate, it requires 2/3, and I don't think you can get that. But then when it comes to the other option, which is called the inherent contempt powers of Congress, that's where Congress can say, you're violating our law, we're going to round you up and put you in our Congress jail. They don't have a Congress jail. They haven't used that power in 100 years. Right. That power is atrophied. It is withered on the vine. That is not an answer. So part of the problem, I got to say, Andy, is that Congress should have passed a tougher law.
Yeah. No, well, maybe that's why it passed almost unanimously, because the Republicans knew that there's no teeth here.
By the way, that's a good point. They wrote a law that could get bipartisan support, even though it didn't until the end. And that's why it was watered down.
Yeah. So from a political standpoint, you mentioned Massey and Khanna. If you remember, they said, as did Marjorie Taylor Greene, that if the Department of Justice doesn't do the right thing here, we will. We will go into the House and we will name names. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. I do think, though, that if there's ever going to be accountability here and justice for survivors, it's going to have to be people like Massey and Khanna and the survivors themselves to name names and to really cite specific examples of these heinous crimes. And I understand why they've been hesitant so far not to, because there's a huge price to pay potentially, and liability and all that. But shy of that, I just can't fathom how this is ever going to resolve itself in a way where justice is served.
I'll give you some reasons for hope. I think that, because again, I'm an optimist. So Democrats will win control of the House in November. I think it's going to be a blue wave. And then they're going to hold hearings. They're going to put people under oath. They're going to do what the Republicans refuse to do.
You mean like the January 6th Commission hearings where Jim Jordan and the others don't show up and ignore subpoenas? Like that kind of hearing?
Yeah, but that's members of Congress. I mean, hey, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were so concerned about being thrown in jail that they're capitulating on the subpoenas. Yeah. So and they're being treated differently than Republicans who are allowed to submit their testimony in writing. But
Okay, proceed with your optimism.
okay. I think there'll be hearings, and they will put people under oath, and we will get some answers, and they will pass a new, tougher law that will have sanctions in it. And whether the Senate passes it, it's another matter. Trump probably doesn't sign that one. But I think that the pressure is going to continue. You think it's bad now? The survivors are the reason why we're here, because the survivors have shown incredible courage. Their press conference was answered. The Republicans fell in line once the survivors spoke out. They decided, okay, we're not standing in front of this train. So I do think you'll get more documents than we have now, but I do not think you're going to get all the files until after Trump is out of office.
In your experience as a prosecutor, former prosecutor, does it make any logical sense to you that there are no co-conspirators to be charged here? I mean, how is that even possible?
Yeah, how do you have a conspiracy without co-conspirators, right? Yeah. Well, I think there are co-conspirators. They're mentioned in the Epstein files. There was never an Epstein list. Remember, that was a thing. That there was never a list. Epstein wasn't stupid enough to put all the names on the list, but there are names in the files. And of those names, we've only seen 3. So will we see the rest of them? I think that they will eventually come out. It's hard to conceal that forever. And you brought up an interesting point. Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie said that they will speak the names on the House floor because the concern is that if the victims speak the names in public, they'll get sued by these powerful people. But if Khanna and Massie do it on the floor, they have the speech and debate clause privilege where they can do it with immunity. But for some reason, they haven't done that yet. And I don't know why. I guess someone is telling them that, that until this is corroborated, that you could still be in trouble by mentioning names on the floor. But Nancy Mace did it when she talked about her own experiences. So I think that's a question. If I had those 2 guys in an interview, that I would ask them, why haven't you mentioned those names on the floor? What's the reason for that? You promised, you said you would, and you haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of lawyer friends, and they always tell me, like, you really can't ever get into real trouble if you tell the truth, right? So if they do name names, unless they're falsely accusing people who are innocent, like, yeah, it might go through a legal process, but through discovery, through all kinds of things, that the truth comes out, and that's where your exoneration comes, no? That's where justice is served.
Yes, but once you make that allegation, just to be fair, I mean, this is a serious allegation. You go on the floor and you say this person is a pedophile. Oh, man, you better be right. You better be right. This is where you better have the corroboration because you could ruin lives like that.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's why. Maybe Massie and Connor are saying, I will say the names, but get me more because I just don't want to be wrong here.
Yeah. Last question. How on earth did Epstein get that sweetheart deal?
Well, I became state attorney 6 years after that deal ended, right? Just so you know, 3 state attorneys before me. So I'll give you the, based on what I know, what happened. So you had these allegations. The police chief of Palm Beach, Michael Ryder, was very adamant that Epstein be charged. And they took it to the state attorney in my old office. And the state attorney's office reviewed it. They said that they had some trouble with cooperation of some of the victims. Others outside said, no, you didn't want to talk to them. So I don't know what the exact truth is. But back then, if you were an underage girl and you were performing sex acts for money, the law said you were a prostitute, you were a criminal. And so that's why Epstein eventually was charged with solicitation of prostitution. Nowadays, thankfully, it is different. We have realized that those underage girls are victims themselves. They're not prostitutes. They're victims. So things have changed. The law has changed. So I'm not trying to defend it. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just trying to explain a little bit what was going through their minds. They said they had witness issue, victim testimony and witness issues, and the law was different back then. And when that happened at the state level, Michael Ryder, the police chief, was so outraged that that the state was dragging its feet, not prosecuting more stringently, that he went to the feds and he said, federal government, FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, come in. And they did. And they came in and they ended up reaching a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein that, number one, had him plead to state charges, not federal charges. State charges, which is unusual. Number two, didn't tell the victims, which violated the law, that there was a non-prosecution agreement here. And number three, included Epstein's co-conspirators in the immunity within the agreement.
Right.
Known and unknown, including Ghislaine Maxwell. She was unknown. So that's what led Ghislaine Maxwell to file her appeal saying, I was supposed to get immunity, even though the co-conspirators did not give up anything. They didn't serve jail time. They didn't give up anything in return for the benefit. So that's why the whole thing smelled bad. And I can't say why. I don't know why the federal government decided to jump in and resolve it in this way. That's the remaining question I have.
Yeah, well, it's something that a lot of people, I don't think will ever understand because it's just unfathomable. But Dave, thanks for coming on. This was a great conversation, and do come back.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Enjoyed it.
All righty, take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Lengale. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.